So, how do we celebrate Korean American Day? I'm going to go ahead and give a little challenge here. If I were to ask you, can you name one Korean American that has impacted the history of the United States, that you respect and inspires you as an American? Could you name one? If you can, that's awesome because Korean American Day can be an opportunity to just grow your knowledge, grow your understanding of these Korean American stories. But if you couldn't name one, maybe this is the year for you to learn at least one Korean American story. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Jeff, and I'm a middle and high school teacher, instructional coach, civic lead, and teacher educator. This Ed Family YT channel is all about helping our students find out what they're good at so that they can do good with it. And so today's topic, helping students to understand their stories, very valuable for both educators and students. In previous Ed Family videos, especially the playlist in the ethnic studies, I've already talked a lot about knowing students by name and knowing students' stories. I've also shared a little bit about how sometimes it can be hard for students to know their own stories. And I just shared how personally, even for myself, it hasn't always been very easy. Having grown up and never having had a teacher that looked like me in all my K through 12 education, nor having the opportunity to learn about Asian American history, and certainly not at all Korean American history. So in 2003, President George W. Bush proclaimed the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the arrival of Korean immigrants to the United States. Both passed by the House and Senate in 2005. And since then, many states across the country have been declaring January the 13th Korean American Day. And so while I was kind of researching this, because I didn't grow up learning about Korean American Day, and I didn't know there was a Korean American Day until very recently, I came across this from the California Legislative Information website, leginfo.legislature.california.gov, so it looks pretty official here. Assembly Concurrent Resolution number 111, introduced by Assembly members Choi and Quirk Silva, January 3rd, 2022. So this is actually this is very recent, actually, January 3rd, 2022. So in here, it talks about ACR 111 as introduced by Choi Korean American Day. This measure would proclaim January the 13th, 2022 as Korean American Day. So as you can see there, this text is probably a little bit small for you to see, but maybe what you can see here is the whereas. So why? So when you look at Korean American Day being proclaimed on January 13th, whereas just means, oh, because of this reason, because of this reason, because of this reason, because of this reason. It's just a very formal way to do that. And so what I did was I just copied each of those statements and then put it on a Google slide so it'd be a little easier to see as I present this to you all. And I'm going to go ahead and just read some of these and give some commentary as well. Whereas on January 13th, 1903, the history of Korean immigration to America began when 102 courageous Korean adults and children landed in the state of Hawaii after venturing across the vast Pacific Ocean aboard the SS Gaelic. So a lot of people feel, how long have Asian Americans, how long have Korean Americans been in the United States? And so we can see here in 1903, this is when the immigration of Korean Americans began. Some people call this a second wave. Once again, there were some political science students and so forth before, but this is when additional folks were coming to the United States. Whereas, because the hopes of these Korean American immigrants for America, the land of opportunity, were quickly hindered by social, economic, and language barriers of unforeseen magnitude. Now, I think immigration can often be a very challenging experience for any group. I think for Korean Americans, it's been challenging, especially during this time period in 1903. I'm not going to go into detail in this Ed Family video why that might have been the case. And some folks might say, hey, why do we need to go back and talk about these social, economic, and language barriers? What is the purpose of looking at that part of the story, that part of the history? Why not just move forward? But then if we were to do so, we're just missing such a great opportunity, an opportunity to see how a people overcame, persevered, a story of resilience. And so hopefully we'll also see a story of resilience as we look at that. Whereas the Korean Americans did not falter in their pursuit of the American dream. They persevered and sacrificed. They established a new home in a new land and educated their children. So yes, when you talk to Korean American immigrants, Korean Americans, whether they're second generation like myself, and I think about my parents, or you talk to any Korean American, many will say how their family members really persevered and sacrificed to give them a better life that many have now. Whereas between 1904 and 1907, approximately 1,000 Korean Americans entered the United States mainland from the state of Hawaii through the city of San Francisco, where the first Korean American political organization and Korean language publications were established. So from Hawaii, the plantation and plantation work, to the West Coast, beginning in the San Francisco area. But recently I found out about Pachapa Camp and Dosan An Chang Ho, and one of the first Korean American communities actually being in Riverside around this time. Whereas while the city of San Francisco remained the center of Korean American community, there was a gradual migration from Northern California to Southern California as more employment opportunities opened up, and as a new burgeoning community of Korean Americans began to thrive in the city of Los Angeles and surrounding areas. So now let's talk about Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles is currently the home to the largest population of Korean Americans in the entire United States. So more than 250,000 Korean Americans in just the Los Angeles area alone. So if you're a teacher in California, this is very relevant. And then let's look at this. If you're a teacher in Orange County, this is even more interesting. Whereas Korean Americans are the largest and fastest growing citizens of Orange County, making Orange County the second largest Korean American population in any county in the nation. And I'm a teacher in Orange County, so if you're a teacher in Orange County, this is very relevant for you. Just in Anaheim Union High School District, and I know there are other districts that probably have even more Asian Americans, but just in Anaheim Union High School District alone, where I work, 21% have reported as being Asian American by the National Center for Educational Statistics in our area. 21%. So if you look at our total student population, which is 29,832, that means about 6,264 are Asian American. And of the Asian Americans, about 19.6 of all the Asian Americans are Korean American. So that's actually a pretty big group within the Asian American group, which when you look at also the entire district total, just in Anaheim Union High School District, it's close to 4% of the district total. 4% of the district total is over 1,000 students. About 1,181 students are Korean American in Anaheim Union High School District. And I'm sure if we looked at Garden Grove or Fullerton or Irvine, it'd probably be even higher. So this is a story of many students in the schools that we work here in Orange County. Whereas while the first Korean immigrants to the United States fought and sacrificed to establish themselves, their children grew up to be patriotic citizens, many of whom went on to serve in the armed forces of the United States during World War II and to make other important contributions to mainstream American society. So can we name one Korean American who made an impact? And if you need a couple just to begin with and you're interested in learning more, and perhaps we'll have highlights in the future at family videos, but what about Dosan An Chang Ho, or Colonel Young-ho Kim, or Dr. Samuel Lee? And there's more, of course, but I'll just leave it with just a few. Whereas the 1965 amendments to the Federal Immigration and Nationality Act opened the door for a new wave of Korean immigrants to enter the United States. Since its enactment, Korean Americans have become one of the fastest growing groups of Asian Americans in the United States. So before that, Most Korean immigrants were restricted from coming to the United States before 1965, 1965 Immigration Act, and most Asian Americans, for that matter, with exclusion laws, including the Chinese exclusion laws, Gentleman's Agreement Act with Japanese Americans, and then also the 1924 Immigration Act of 24. Once again, excluded immigration from many of these Asian countries at that time. And it wasn't until 1965 where the laws were changed. So as a result, whereas today the number of people of Korean ancestry living in the United States has grown to more than 1,700,000, representing a more than 67-fold increase since 1960. So big change since 1965 and that 1965 Immigration Act. Whereas in 1994, the National Association of Korean Americans was founded in the state of New York, becoming the first national civil and human rights organization of Korean Americans. This is a little bit after the 1992 LA riots. Whereas on June 27, 2002, National Association of Korean Americans was instrumental in passing the historic United States Senate Resolution 185, recognizing the 100th anniversary of Korean immigration to the United States, just giving us the opportunity to talk about it today and think about Korean Americans and the Korean American that has made a difference in our history in the United States of America. Whereas, in accordance with Senate Resolution 185, President George W. Bush included a proclamation recognizing January 13, 2003 as the centennial of Korean immigration to the United States, commending Korean Americans for their important role in building, defending, and sustaining the United States of America. Whereas Korean American Day is celebrated on January 13th of each year to not only commemorate the arrival of the first Korean immigrants that we talked about today, but also to honor Korean Americans' immense contribution to every aspect of our society. Whereas Korean Americans have made important contributions as Californians in the field of finance, technology, law, medicine, education, sports, media, the arts, the military, the government, as well as many other areas. Whereas, and once again, that whereas means because Korean Americans have been the forefront of the Hallyu Korean wave, which includes K-pop, K-drama, K-foods that have become integral parts of mainstream American society, which enrich our very diverse state. Once again, opportunity to be culturally honoring because we're so culturally blessed. Whereas with diligence, fortitude, and enduring belief in the American dream, Korean Americans have helped turn emergent areas within the state into thriving and respectable communities while raising their children. Whereas the Korean American community prepares for a new area and creates new history, Korean Americans must instill in younger generations the proper appreciation for the courage and values of their forefathers, a deep sense of their roots and pride in their own cultural heritage so that they may better contribute to the great state of California, which is rich with ethnic and cultural diversity. Be it resolved by the State Assembly of the State of California, the Senate thereof concurring, that the legislator hereby proclaims January 13, 2022 as Korean American Day, and be it further resolved that the Chief of the Clerk of the Assembly transmit copies of this resolution to the author for appropriate distribution. You know, at the recording of this video, it's actually very close to Martin Luther King Jr. Day as well. And I love this day because it honors a person that has made a huge impact for our country, has impacted my life as well. It's an African-American story, but it's also an American story, but it's also an African-American story. And so as we look at Korean American Day, is there one Korean American that you can look at and think, wow, that's a great story. That's a story that impacts you and inspires you to be the best American that you can be. If not, this January 13th is an opportunity to learn one story, at least one story. Was this video helpful for you to learn a little bit more about Korean Americans and Korean American Day? Then go ahead and hit that like button. In the future Ed Family videos, I'm planning to do more series, more information about Korean Americans, Asian Americans, and ethnic studies, along with a variety of other resources. So if you're interested in learning more about that, be sure to subscribe. This is Dr. Jeff from Ed Family, signing out.